He stood alone in the dust, a German shepherd with a twisted leg, trembling under the weight of every whisper in the crowd. Not a single hand went up, not one bid. They called him broken, unfixable, a burden. The auctioneer was seconds from ending it all, until a man no one had noticed quietly raised his hand. No words, no hesitation, just one simple gesture that would set off a chain of events no one could have imagined. What was it about this dog that pulled a stranger from the shadows? And what secret did that man carry that made him walk straight into the pain everyone else ran from? The Navajo Reservation livestock auction wasn't exactly the kind of place you went looking for grace. Between the haze of cattle dust, the clang of metal gates, and the relentless shouts of buyers sizing up working stock, there was barely room to breathe, let alone feel. But that day, something shifted the noise into silence. It wasn't the loudest voice or the biggest bull, it was the dog. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The sun bore down mercilessly on the Four Corners region of the Navajo Nation, where red cliffs and sagebrush stretched out beneath an endless blue sky. Tuba City wasn't much to look at, a small reservation town where poverty clung to the edges of modest homes and businesses, yet pride ran deep in its people. The community sat at a crossroads, literally and figuratively, caught between honoring ancient ways and the harsh economic realities of modern life. Down a dirt road that wound through juniper trees stood a small cabin, set apart from others. Smoke occasionally curled from its chimney even in warmer months. The only sign someone lived there. This was where Takota Begay had retreated 5 years ago after returning from his third tour in Afghanistan. At 45, his face was weathered like the surrounding landscape. Deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much. His black hair, now streaked with silver at the temples, remained long in the traditional way, though he rarely tied it back with the ceremonial bands his grandfather had given him. Takota spoke little these days. Before the war, he'd been known as a gifted horse trainer whose gentle hands could calm the wildest Mustang. Now, his neighbors whispered about the nightmares that caused him to cry out in the darkness. The Veterans Center in Flagstaff had a file 3 inches thick on his PTSD, but he'd stopped making the long drive for appointments. Instead, he carved small wooden animals, sold them at the trading post, and kept to himself. On the other side of town stood the modern veterinary clinic run by Dr. Nijoni Yazzie. At 38, she represented the new generation of Navajo professionals educated at Colorado State University, but drawn back to serve her people. Her clinic, with its clean lines and solar panels, stood in stark contrast to the traditional hogans still found throughout the reservation. Yet inside, alongside modern medical equipment, she kept sacred herbs and performed blessing ceremonies for animals in her care. She moved between worlds with the grace of someone who respected both. The community's most prominent businessman, Malcolm Greyeyes, owned half the commercial properties in town. His empire of gas stations, convenience stores, and tourist shops employed many locals. But rumors swirled about his other enterprises, the ones operating in abandoned ranch properties on the reservation's edges. His polished appearance and political connections made him untouchable, especially to Sheriff Key Danette Claw, whose worn badge seemed to carry less authority with each passing year. Connecting these lives was James Many Horses, an elder whose 90 years had given him the quiet authority of one who had seen the land change through nearly a century. He alone seemed unafraid to speak truth, even when it cut against the grain of progress or profit. The auctioneer's voice crackled through ancient speakers as he worked his way through livestock lot after lot. The crowd, mostly Navajo ranchers mixed with a few white traders from borderland towns, shifted restlessly in the heat. Dakota hadn't planned to be here at all. His truck had broken down on the way back from the trading post, and waiting for parts meant killing time at the auction yards where he could at least find shade. He sat at the back, cap pulled low, trying to ignore the press of bodies and the occasional stares of recognition. 5 years back, and still they looked at him like he might shatter or explode. Maybe they were right to worry. The medication bottle in his pocket remained untouched, though his hands occasionally trembled when engine backfires or slamming gates echoed through the yard. "Next lot!" the auctioneer called, voice flat with disinterest. "Working dog, German Shepherd, male." Meh. The side gate squeaked open, and unlike the confident cattle or sheep that had preceded it, the dog that limped into the ring seemed to fight against every step. Mud-caked fur hung in patches over protruding ribs. One hind leg dragged awkwardly, forcing an unnatural gait that spoke of old, untreated injury. But it was the dog's eyes that made Dakota's breath catch, amber-colored and wide with a vigilance born of expecting the worst. "Start the bidding at 50. Working dog. Could be trained." No hands moved. No one spoke. 40 then. Surely worth something to someone. The silence deepened. Someone coughed. Another spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Dog's broken," a voice called from somewhere in the crowd. "Put it down and save everyone the trouble." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Dakota felt his heart hammering suddenly against his ribs, a too familiar tightness gripping his chest. The dog stood still now, head slightly lowered but not cowering, as if it had accepted whatever came next, but refused to show fear. The posture sparked something in Dakota's memory, a flash of sand, heat worse than today's, and men standing just as straight while everything around them fell apart. $30. The auctioneer tried one last time, already reaching for his gavel. "No, then we'll move to the next." Dakota's hand was in the air before he'd made a conscious decision to raise it. The movement felt detached from him, as if someone else had lifted his arm, yet he didn't lower it. Even as heads turned and whispers started, "We have 30, the auctioneer said, surprise evident in his voice. 30 going once. The gavel fell with a crack that jolted Dakota back to full awareness. He'd just bought a dog, a broken dog. The realization sat heavy in his stomach as he made his way to the payment office, ignoring the stares and comments that followed him. What was he thinking? His cabin barely held together for him, let alone taking on another damaged soul. Outside the collection pen, Dakota found himself face to face with the German Shepherd, up close. The damage was even more apparent. Old scars crisscrossed the animal's neck where a chain had rubbed fur away. Patches of skin showed signs of infection and neglect. The dog watched him warily, muscles tense to run or fight. "They say he's mean," a yard worker commented, handing Dakota a frayed rope leash. "Won't let nobody touch him. Had to trank him to get him here." Dakota took the rope but didn't move to put it on the dog. Instead, he crouched down, not making eye contact, and spoke softly in Navajo, the language he reserved for prayers and nightmares. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, the words flowing like water over stone, "but I know what it is to be broken." The dog's ears twitched slightly, the only indication it heard him. Dakota didn't rush. He remained still, palm open, just within reach. 5 minutes passed. 10. The yard worker had long since wandered off, shaking his head at the foolishness. Finally, almost imperceptibly, the dog lowered its head and stepped forward, not close enough to touch, but close enough for Dakota to gently loop the rope around its neck without grabbing. No sudden movements, no demands, just an offered path. The drive home was silent. The dog lay tense in the truck bed, watching the landscape pass with the same vigilance it had shown in the auction ring. Dakota found himself checking the rearview mirror more than necessary, half expecting the animal to have vanished like smoke. "Haulapai," he said to the empty cab. "That's what we'll call you, warrior from the east." Then he shook his head, feeling foolish for naming something that would probably run as soon as he opened the tailgate. But when they arrived at the cabin and Dakota lowered the gate, the dog Haulapai didn't bolt. He stood shakily, favoring his injured leg, and waited as if for instructions. His eyes darted between Dakota and the surrounding juniper, calculating distances and possibilities. "Your choice," Dakota told him, stepping back to clear a path. "Stay or go." Dusk was settling over the mesas, bringing the first hint of coolness. Haulapai limped down from the truck and sniffed the air. Then the ground. His movements were cautious but deliberate as he made a slow circuit around the cabin's perimeter, checking every corner and shadow. Dakota watched from the porch, not forcing anything. Inside, Dakota laid an old blanket by the wood stove and filled a bowl with water, then retreated to give the dog space. Hours passed. Night fell completely. The water remained untouched, and the blanket empty. Just as Dakota was preparing for bed, a soft scratch came at the door. Haulapai stood on the threshold, still wary, but somehow having made a decision. Dakota stepped aside silently, and the dog entered, immediately finding the darkest corner from which to observe the room. He didn't approach the blanket or water. He simply watched, waiting for the trap to spring. That first night set the pattern for the days that followed. Haulapai existed in the cabin like a ghost, present but untouchable, accepting shelter but not comfort. He drank only when Dakota wasn't looking and ate scraps only when they were left unattended. The injuries went untended because any movement toward them sent the dog retreating to his corner. A low growl, warning against approach. News traveled fast on the reservation. By the third day, Dakota had visitors unusual enough to cause comment. "They say you bought Raymond Sosey's fighting dog," said James Many Horses, appearing at the cabin without warning, as elders often did. The old man stood straight despite his years, silver hair braided precisely, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "I bought a dog," Dakota corrected, offering the elder coffee without invitation. Both men knew it would be accepted. "That dog has a history," James continued, settling into the porch chair, hands curved around the steaming mug. "Bad things happen at the old Red Rock Ranch. Animals disappear. Strange trucks come and go at night." Dakota said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "Malcolm Gray Eyes bought that property 5 years ago," the elder added, watching Dakota carefully. "Says he's developing it for tourism. No tourists I ever seen go there." Inside the cabin, Haulapai had retreated beneath the small table, eyes fixed on the door, body rigid with tension at the visitor's voice. "I'm not looking for trouble," Dakota finally said, the words feeling false even as he spoke them. James smiled, the expression deepening the 1,000 lines on his weathered face. "Trouble has a way of finding those who need it. Grandson." He sipped his coffee, then added more casually, "Doctor, Yazzie helps animals no one else will touch. She has medicines, understands pain." Before Dakota could respond, a truck appeared on the dirt road leading to his cabin. Sheriff Danette Claw's patrol vehicle, dust billowing behind it. James nodded as if this confirmed something. "See, already it begins." He stood with the fluid grace that belied his age. When you're ready to heal that dog, healing will find its way to you too. With that cryptic statement, he walked down the porch steps, nodding respectfully to the sheriff as they passed. Sheriff Key Dennett Claw was 15 years younger than Tekoda, but carried himself with the heavy authority of his badge. His uniform was pressed despite the heat and dust, his face carefully neutral as he approached. "Bigay," he acknowledged. "Heard you acquired a new pet." "Not a pet," Tekoda replied. "Just a dog." That dog was evidence in an ongoing investigation, Dennett Claw said, eyes scanning the property. "Should have been put down after the raid on Sosie's place. Evidence can't bid at auction," Tekoda pointed out. "I paid fair." The sheriff's face tightened. "Some things on this reservation are complicated. Best leave them to those who understand the bigger picture." "A wounded animal isn't complicated," Tekoda said. "Neither is right and wrong. That your experience from the war, Bigay, that things are simple." The question carried a barb, and Dennett Claw knew it. "Malcolm Greyeyes is bringing jobs to Tuba City, economic development, things we need more than strays." From inside the cabin came a low, sustained growl. Holopai had emerged from beneath the table and stood rigidly by the screen door, eyes fixed on the sheriff. Hackles raised, Dennett Claw's hand moved instinctively toward his holster, then stopped. "Control your animal, Bigay." "He's not mine to control," Tekoda said softly. "But he seems to know something I don't." The sheriff stepped back toward his vehicle. "Friendly advice. That dog should disappear. Some lost things should stay lost." With that, he departed in another cloud of dust, leaving Tekoda standing on the porch, the weight of unspoken threats settling around him like storm clouds. Inside, Holopai's growl had subsided, but his body remained tense, eyes fixed on the road long after the sheriff had gone, for the first time since his arrival. The dog moved deliberately toward Tekoda and stood beside him, their shadows merging in the afternoon light. "Seems we both recognize trouble when we see it," Tekoda murmured. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that slowly took shape like pottery on a wheel, uncertain at first. Then gradually finding its form, Tekoda spoke to Holopai in Navajo each morning, not expecting responses, just offering words as gentle bridges between their silences. He described the weather, the distant mesas, the small wooden animals forming under his carving knife. The dog listened from his corner, amber eyes tracking every movement but never approaching. On the 23rd day, something shifted. Tekoda had fallen asleep in his chair, dreams tangling him in memories of sand and gunfire. He woke gasping, sweat-soaked, to find Holopai standing beside him, not touching, but present, a sentinel keeping watch. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for the first time, the dog didn't look away. "Thank you," Tekoda whispered. The following morning, when Tekoda placed the food bowl down, Holopai approached while he was still there, not waiting for him to retreat, as had been their unspoken arrangement. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in their careful world of boundaries and space, it felt monumental. By the weekend, the dog had begun following Tekoda outside, maintaining a constant distance but tracking his movements around the property. The limp remained pronounced, but the dog's strength was returning. Patches of new fur growing over previously bare skin. Only once did Tekoda reach toward him, an automatic gesture quickly aborted when Holopai flinched violently away. "No rush," Tekoda told him, hands returning to his sides. "We both know about keeping distance. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during Dakota's weekly ritual of washing laundry in the old tub behind the cabin. The splash of water sent Howlapai into sudden panic, not running away, but freezing, a tremor starting in his haunches and spreading until his entire body shook. Dakota immediately stilled. Recognizing the signs of terror overriding reason, he'd seen it in men, had experienced it himself. This wasn't ordinary fear. That evening, he began talking to Howlapai about Afghanistan, words he'd never shared with the VA counselors or the well-meaning social workers. He spoke of the dust that got into everything, the weight of gear in 120-degree heat, the way silence could suddenly explode into chaos. The dog listened, head tilted slightly, as Dakota's voice moved between English and Navajo, between past and present. "Maybe we recognize each other," Dakota suggested, "because we've walked the same roads." The next morning, determined to address the physical wounds that still troubled the dog, Dakota gathered old towels and a soft brush. He moved deliberately, letting Howlapai see everything, explaining each item before setting it down. Then he sat on the floor, waiting. Minutes stretched long. A woodpecker drummed against a distant pine. Finally, with hesitant steps, Howlapai approached and lowered himself beside Dakota, not touching, but close enough that his warmth was palpable. Slowly, Dakota raised the brush, narrating his movements. "Just going to start with your shoulders. Tell me if I need to stop." The first contact was featherlight. Barely disturbing the fur, Howlapai tensed but didn't move away. Gradually, Dakota worked along the dog's back, gentle strokes removing dirt and loose fur, careful to avoid pressure on visible sore spots. It was when he reached the hindquarters, near the injured leg, that everything changed. The brush passed over a patch of fur that looked no different from the rest. Howlapai's reaction was explosive. A yelp of pain transformed instantly into a snarl as he whirled, teeth bared, eyes wild with something beyond fear. Dakota fell backward, the brush clattering across the floor. For a heartbeat, predator and prey faced each other, primitive instincts overriding weeks of careful trust-building. Dakota didn't move, didn't speak. He controlled his breathing with the same techniques that had kept him alive when pinned down by enemy fire. Slow inhale, slower exhale. No sudden movements. Howlapai's snarl subsided, confusion replacing rage in those amber eyes as the present gradually reclaimed him from whatever memory had seized control. When the dog backed away, retreating to his corner, Dakota remained on the floor, heart hammering. It wasn't just the near bite that disturbed him. It was the recognition of what lay beneath the reaction, not aggression, but trauma so profound it lived in the body's cells. Something or someone had hurt this animal deliberately, repeatedly, in ways that left invisible scars deeper than the visible ones. "I see you now," Dakota said softly to the trembling dog. "I see what they did." That evening, he made a decision. Loading Howlapai into the truck was a delicate negotiation. The dog clearly associated vehicles with transport to painful destinations. Only after Dakota sat beside the open tailgate for nearly an hour, explaining their destination in his low, steady voice, did Howlapai finally jump in, his body language screaming reluctance. Dr. Nizhoni Yazzi's clinic sat on the edge of town, a modern single-story building with a traditional hogan behind it, where she conducted ceremonies too sacred for the sterile medical space. The parking lot was empty when they arrived. As Dakota had called ahead, explaining he needed privacy for a potentially dangerous animal, Nizhoni met them at the side entrance, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. white coat worn over jeans and a turquoise blouse. At 38, her face carried the serene confidence of someone who had found her purpose. Laugh lines around her eyes, the only concession to age. "This is the auction dog?" she asked, keeping her distance as Dakota coaxed Halapai from the truck. "His name is Halapai," Dakota said, realizing it was the first time he'd spoken the name to anyone else, making it real beyond the space between him and the dog. Nizhoni nodded, her eyes assessing the animal with professional detachment that couldn't quite mask her compassion. "Bring him through slowly. I've cleared the schedule and sent my assistant home." The examination room had been prepared, towels covering the metal table. Lights dimmed, the usual antiseptic smell masked by the gentle scent of cedar and sage. Dakota lifted Halapai onto the table, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow given what was to come. "I need to sedate him," Nizhoni said after watching Halapai's tense posture and darting eyes. "The leg needs x-rays, and there's no way he'll tolerate proper examination otherwise." Dakota nodded, keeping one hand on Halapai's shoulder as Nizhoni prepared the injection. The dog's eyes locked on his, a question in them that Dakota couldn't answer except to say, "I'm staying right here." As the sedative took effect, Halapai's body relaxed for perhaps the first time since Dakota had met him. The constant vigilance slipped away, leaving only a stillness that made him look smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Nizhoni worked methodically, examining every inch with gentle, capable hands. She took samples of infected areas, cleaned wounds Dakota hadn't even detected, and ran the X-ray machine over the damaged leg. Throughout, she maintained a professional silence broken only by occasional requests for Dakota to shift position or hold something. It was when she reached the area that had triggered Halapai's violent reaction that her composure finally cracked. Parting the fur revealed a pattern of circular scars, perfectly spaced, deliberately placed where they wouldn't be immediately visible. "These are burns," she said, voice tight. "Cigarette burns. And here," she pointed to marks higher on the flank. "These are consistent with electrical prods, high voltage, repeated applications." Dakota's hands curled into fists. "Dog fighting." Nizhoni nodded grimly. "The leg injury isn't from a fight, though. This was broken deliberately and allowed to heal wrong. Sometimes they do that to make dogs more vicious through constant pain." She continued her examination, each discovery adding to the grim catalog of abuse. "I need to take a blood sample and check for a microchip." The scanner passed over Halapai's shoulder blades, beeping once to indicate a positive reading. Nizhoni's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "He's chipped. Give me a minute." She disappeared into her office, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "The chip is registered to a closed kennel facility, the old training center out near Cameron. Records show he was a working dog." She hesitated. "Military-grade training." "Military," Dakota repeated, something cold settling in his stomach. "The facility closed 5 years ago, but the registration lists the owner as Malcolm Gray Eyes Enterprises." Nizhoni met his eyes. "Dakota, this dog was part of something bigger than backyard fighting. This is organized." The name landed like a stone between them. Malcolm Gray Eyes, businessman, tribal council consultant, self-proclaimed economic savior of the reservation, the man Sheriff Danette Claw had explicitly warned him about. "There's more," Nizhoni continued, pointing to the screen. "The original training designation for this dog, his military tag, this can't be right." Her voice trailed off as she looked from the screen to Dakota's suddenly pale face. "What designation?" Dakota's voice was barely audible. "Unit 7, Canine Team Delta." Afghanistan deployment 2018 to 2120. Handler listed as us. She stopped, looking up at him. The handler's name is redacted, but the unit number wasn't that yours. The room seemed to tilt around Dakota as memories crashed through carefully constructed barriers. A different German shepherd, younger, stronger, moving through training exercises with perfect precision, a dog that had accompanied his unit on patrol, that had saved their lives by detecting an IED in a village street, a dog that had disappeared during the chaos of an ambush, presumed killed in action. Ghost, he whispered, the name he hadn't spoken in 5 years. Howlapai's ear twitched at the sound, even through the sedation. That's not possible, Dakota said, shaking his head. That dog died overseas. Najoni pointed to a scar on Howlapai's shoulder, partially hidden by regrown fur. Military working dogs are tattooed with their service numbers. If we shave this area, no. Dakota cut her off. Not while he's sedated, not without his knowledge. The words sounded irrational even to his own ears, but they felt important, vital. Even this dog had endured enough violations. When he's ready, we'll know. Najoni didn't argue. Instead, she finished her examination in silence, administering antibiotics and pain medication, cleaning what wounds she could access. When she finally stepped back, her face was composed again, but her eyes held a new determination. Whatever happened to this dog, however he got from Afghanistan to an auction in Arizona, someone is responsible, she said. And given what I'm seeing, they should be held accountable. As the sedation began to wear off, Howlapai's eyes opened, immediately seeking Dakota. Something had shifted between them, a recognition that went beyond their shared weeks at the cabin. The dog lifted his head, still groggy, but deliberately pressing his muzzle against Dakota's hand in a gesture that could not be misinterpreted. I think, Dakota said slowly, he's been waiting for me to remember him. Dawn broke over the mesas, painting the red rock in shades of gold and amber that matched Howlapai's watchful eyes. Dakota sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling beside him, mind still reeling from the previous day's revelations. The dog lay nearby, closer than ever before, his body oriented protectively toward Dakota rather than poised for escape. How did you get here? Dakota asked softly. What happened after the ambush? The questions hung in the early morning air, unanswerable yet demanding resolution. Military dogs were equipment in the eyes of the government, valuable, trained equipment, but not personnel to be accounted for with the same rigor. If Howlapai had been wounded but not killed, what twisted path had brought him from the dust of Afghanistan to the cruelty of Malcolm Greyeyes? Dakota's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Few people had his number, and fewer still would call at this hour. Najoni's voice came through clearly despite the reservation's notoriously poor reception. I've been doing some digging, she said without preamble. That training facility near Cameron, it was contracted to rehabilitate military working dogs for civilian adoption after their service. But there were complaints, dogs disappearing, adoptions that couldn't be verified. The tribal council pulled the license 3 years ago, but by then, the damage was done. Dakota finished, watching Howlapai's ears prick forward at the sound of Najoni's voice through the phone. There's a network, she continued. Not just dogfighting, guard dogs, intimidation animals for private security firms. They take military-trained dogs and repurpose them. The word landed like a euphemism for torture. Dakota's grip tightened on the phone as he thought of Howlapai's scars, the deliberate breaking of his leg, the methodical destruction of everything good and loyal in him, yet they hadn't succeeded. Something of the original dog remained buried deep, traumatized, but present. "I want to help," Najoni said after a moment of silence. "This isn't just about one dog anymore. It's dangerous," Dakota warned, though he knew from her tone that her mind was made up. "I've already treated 3 dogs this year with similar injuries," she replied. "This stops now." After arranging to meet later, Dakota turned his attention back to Haulapai. The dog needed exercise to strengthen his damaged leg, and Dakota needed to clear his head. They set out along a narrow trail that wound through the juniper toward a small mesa where Dakota sometimes went to think. The dog moved with more confidence now, pain medication easing his gait. Though the permanent damage ensured he would always carry that distinctive limp, he ranged ahead occasionally, then circled back as if to check on Dakota behavior, so reminiscent of patrol patterns that Dakota's chest tightened with recognition. At the top of the mesa, they paused, looking out over the vast landscape of the reservation, beautiful and harsh, nurturing and unforgiving, like the people who had made their lives here for countless generations. "We all have our wounds," Dakota said to the dog, who sat alertly beside him, "the ones that show and the ones we hide." The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their solitude. Haulapai stiffened, a low growl building in his throat. Through the junipers, Dakota glimpsed Sheriff Dennett Claw's patrol car pulling up to his cabin. The officer stepped out, looked around the empty yard, then did something unexpected. He began searching, methodically checking the shed and peering through windows. Dakota and Haulapai remained motionless on the mesa, watching as Dennett Claw eventually returned to his vehicle, spoke briefly into his radio, and departed. Only when the dust had settled did they make their way back down, Haulapai moving with heightened vigilance, his body language communicating clear distrust. At the cabin, nothing seemed disturbed, yet Dakota felt the invisible fingerprints of intrusion. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, a warning as clear as tracks in wet sand. The sheriff's visit wasn't routine, it was reconnaissance. By the time Dakota arrived at Najoni's clinic that afternoon, his resolve had hardened into something more focused than anger. Haulapai seemed to sense the change, staying closer, his own alertness matching Dakota's heightened state. Najoni greeted them in the hogan behind the clinic rather than the sterile examination room. The circular dwelling with its earthen floor and central fire pit was where she conducted the more traditional aspects of her practice healing ceremonies that blended ancient knowledge with her modern veterinary training. Today, however, it served a different purpose: privacy away from potential listening ears. James, Many Horses, was already seated inside, his presence a surprise to Dakota. The elder nodded in greeting, seeming unsurprised when Haulapai approached him without hesitation, sniffing his outstretched hand with none of the wariness he showed to most humans. "Dogs know who walks in balance," James commented. "This one has seen the shadow world and returned." Najoni had spread papers across a low table, printouts, maps, and photographs that represented hours of research. "I've found 4 properties connected to Gray Eyes that might be involved," she explained, indicating locations on a reservation map. "All remote, all with restricted access, all supposedly for agricultural development. The Red Rock Ranch is the most active," James added. "Strange vehicles at night, men with guns watching the perimeter." Dakota studied the map, military training surfacing as he assessed approaches and vulnerabilities. "We need evidence before we can involve federal authorities. Reservation jurisdiction is complicated, and Gray Eyes has influence." "That's why I brought these," Najoni said, producing a small camera and voice recorder. "Documentation is our best weapon." James cleared his throat. "There is another path. Our people have ways of seeking justice that don't involve courts built on white man's laws." Dakota felt the weight of the elder's words, the suggestion of traditional retribution. Community judgment rendered according to codes older than the United States itself. It was tempting, especially with Holopai's warm presence against his leg, a constant reminder of suffering that demanded answer. "We start with evidence," he decided. "Justice needs truth before it needs vengeance." The planning took hours, the small group carefully assessing risks and contingencies. James provided information gleaned from the complex web of family relationships that connected all parts of reservation life. Najoni contributed her professional knowledge of what to look for: kennels, medical supplies, training equipment. Dakota mapped approaches and escape routes. The tactical mind that had once guided soldiers now focused on a different kind of mission. As dusk approached, they prepared to disperse. James placed a hand on Dakota's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong for a man of his years. "The dog is not the only one finding his way back," the elder observed. "You have been a ghost too long. Grandson." The words followed Dakota home, echoing in his mind as he and Holopai settled in for the evening. For the first time, the dog chose to lie near Dakota's bed rather than in his usual corner. Another small barrier dissolved between them. The next morning brought an unwelcome visitor. Malcolm Gray's black SUV appeared on the dirt road shortly after sunrise. Trailing dust like a comet's tail, Holopai spotted it first. A growl rumbling deep in his chest before the vehicle was even visible to Dakota. Gray Eyes stepped out alone, dressed in the careful, casual attire of a man who wanted to appear relatable while spending more on his boots than most reservation residents earned in a month. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of wealth and influence, his smile practiced but never reaching his eyes. "Dakota Begay," he called, stopping at a respectful distance from the porch where Dakota stood. "Thought it was time we met properly. May I approach?" Holopai's growl deepened, and Dakota rested a calming hand on the dog's head. "Far enough is fine," he replied. Gray Eyes nodded, unperturbed. "I hear you've acquired an interesting animal. Sheriff mentioned you might be having some trouble with it." "No trouble," Dakota said evenly. "He knows his friends." The businessman's smile flickered but held. "I've got a proposition for you. That dog, I'm willing to take it off your hands. $500. That's 10 times what you paid at auction." "Not for sale." "1,000. Then be reasonable. Begay, a man with your history, could use that money. The VA benefits can't stretch far." Dakota felt rather than saw Holopai shift position, moving to stand slightly ahead of him, a guardian's stance. "Why would a businessman like you want a crippled dog?" Gray Eyes shrugged, the gesture too casual to be genuine. "I run a rehabilitation program for damaged animals, part of my community outreach. That animal deserves professional care. He's getting it." Something cold flashed in Gray Eyes' eyes, the practiced smile slipping further. 2,000, final offer. After that, things get complicated." "They already are," Dakota replied. "Ghost isn't for sale at any price." The use of the military name was deliberate, and its effect immediate. Gray Eyes' composure fractured for just a moment, surprise and calculation passing across his features before the mask returned. "Ghost, strange name for a shepherd." Not so strange for a military working dog who was reported killed in action, Dakota countered, watching carefully. Odd how he ended up here. Don't you think? Gray Eyes adjusted his designer sunglasses, creating a moment to recover his strategy. Military dogs, fascinating animals, so loyal, so programmable. He glanced at Holopai, whose growl had subsided into watchful silence. But once they're broken, they never quite come back. Something to consider, given your own experience. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Dakota stepped forward, and Holopai moved with him in perfect synchronization. "We appreciate the visit," Dakota said, "but we're done here." "For now," Gray Eyes agreed, retreating to his vehicle. "Think about my offer. Begay, some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you've already lost one war." As the SUV disappeared down the dirt road, Dakota knelt beside Holopai, examining him with new eyes. "He recognized you," he said softly, "which means he knows exactly who you are and where you came from." The investigation accelerated after Gray Eyes' visit. That evening, Dakota, Najoni, and Holopai conducted their first reconnaissance of the Red Rock Ranch property. They left Dakota's truck hidden among the junipers a mile away, approaching on foot through the gathering darkness. Holopai moved with surprising stealth despite his injury, leading rather than following. His military training evidently resurfacing, the ranch sprawled across a secluded valley. Main buildings dark, but security lights illuminating the perimeter. They observed from a ridge, Najoni using binoculars while Dakota sketched the layout in a small notebook. Armed guards patrolled at irregular intervals, excessive security for agricultural development. "There," Najoni whispered, pointing to a low building set apart from the others. "Those are kennel runs." Through the binoculars, Dakota could make out the distinctive shape of chain-link enclosures. A guard passed by, flashlight sweeping the area, and in its beam Dakota glimpsed movement, the shadowy forms of dogs pacing their cages. "We need to get closer," he decided. "Documentation won't be enough from here." They worked their way down the ridge, using natural features for cover. Holopai moved ahead, nose testing the wind, guiding them along a path that avoided the guards' routine patterns. Dakota recognized the behavior from Afghanistan the dog was scouting, protecting his team. At the edge of the compound, they found their first concrete evidence, a disposal pit, partially covered but clearly visible in the moonlight. Contained the remains of what could only be dogs, dozens of them, in various states of decomposition. Najoni swallowed hard but took photographs, her hands steady despite the horror before them. "These aren't fighting casualties," she whispered. "These are training deaths, dogs that wouldn't turn vicious, or broke down under the conditioning." A sound caught Holopai's attention, his head snapping toward the kennel building. A cry, barely audible but unmistakable to those who knew a dog in pain. "We can't leave them," Najoni said, her voice tight. "We can't save them tonight." Dakota countered, though the words cost him. "We need to do this right, or Gray Eyes walks away clean." As they retreated, Dakota noticed Holopai's reluctance, the dog repeatedly looking back toward the kennels. He understood the feeling, the weight of leaving others behind, the guilt of saving yourself when comrades remained in danger. It was a burden he'd carried from Afghanistan, one that haunted his dreams still. Back at the truck, they found James waiting for them, having appointed himself lookout. The elder listened to their report in silence, face grave in the dashboard light. "There will be consequences for this night's work," he finally said, Gray Eyes has eyes everywhere, and Dennett Claw answers to him before the law. Then we work faster, Najoni replied, determination hardening her voice. Tomorrow we check the other properties. Over the next week, their investigation built momentum. Each night they documented another facility, building a comprehensive picture of Gray Eyes' operation. Dogs acquired from military sources were reprogrammed through systematic abuse, then sold as guard dogs, fighting animals, or intimidation weapons. The profitable ones were kept. The failures ended in the disposal pits. Word began to spread through the community whispers at first. Then more open discussions. Some supported their efforts. Horrified by the evidence Najoni carefully shared with trusted elders and community leaders, others defended Gray Eyes, citing the jobs his businesses provided, the donations he made to community programs. He built the new youth center. A woman argued at the trading post when Dakota overheard discussions of the investigation. Where will that money come from if he goes from businesses that don't torture animals? Another man countered, our traditions teach respect for all creation. What he does spits on those teachings. The division cut along predictable lines. Economic pragmatism versus traditional values. Short-term gains versus spiritual costs. It was a debate as old as the reservation itself, now focused on the specific evil in their midst. At the cabin, Dakota and Halapai settled into a new rhythm. The dog slept beside Dakota's bed now, occasionally waking him from nightmares with a gentle nose against his hand. During the day, they worked on rehabilitation exercises Najoni had prescribed, walking on different surfaces to strengthen the damaged leg. Simple command responses to rebuild trust in human directions. Most remarkable was the change in Halapai's eyes. The constant vigilance remained, but the fear had receded, replaced by something Dakota recognized from his military days, the focused determination of a working dog with a mission. Halapai wasn't just recovering, he was preparing. On the 8th night of their investigation, everything changed. They had targeted a property near the reservation's eastern boundary, a supposed warehousing facility rarely visited during daylight hours. Their approach was careful, practiced now after multiple operations, with James once again serving as lookout at their rendezvous point. The warehouse appeared abandoned at first glance. No lights, no visible security, but Halapai's behavior told a different story. The dog moved with heightened alertness, repeatedly indicating a corner of the building where a loading dock stood in darkness. Using the camera's night vision function, Najoni captured images of the seemingly empty structure. Only when they reviewed the photographs did they spot what human eyes had missed, a carefully concealed security camera mounted above the loading dock. "We need to leave," Dakota said immediately. "They know we're here." They retreated quickly, Halapai leading them on a different route than their approach, his training asserting itself in tactical decisions that might have seemed like animal instinct to anyone who didn't know better. A mile from the warehouse, they heard vehicles starting up behind them, pursuit mobilizing. James wasn't at the rendezvous point. Instead, they found signs of a struggle, the elder's walking stick abandoned on the ground. Drag marks leading to tire tracks. Najoni gasped, kneeling to examine a dark stain on the dirt. "Blood," she confirmed, her voice tight with fear. "They took him!" Dakota made a swift decision. "We can't go back to the cabin or the clinic. They'll be watching both." "The Hogan at Blackfoot Canyon," Najoni suggested. "My grandmother's place. It's been empty since she passed, but it's still in our family." They drove through back roads to avoid potential roadblocks, hyper-aware of every vehicle they passed. Halapai stood alert in the truck bed, scanning continuously. A guardian now rather than a casualty. The hogan was indeed abandoned but intact. Dust covering the simple furnishings inside. Nijhoni lit a small fire in the central pit while Dakota secured the perimeter, checking sight lines and escape routes with the methodical thoroughness of his military training. "They'll hurt him," Nijhoni said when they finally settled, her composure cracking. "James is 83. His heart, he's stronger than he looks," Dakota said. The worry gnawed at him too. "And they need information from him. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "We can't go to Denetclaw. The tribal police answer to the council, and half the council is in Gray-Eye's pocket." Dakota checked the camera, reviewing their accumulated evidence. "We bypass them all. Go federal. This crosses state lines. Involves military property. That puts it in FBI jurisdiction." Nijhoni looked skeptical. "And how many years have federal authorities ignored what happens on reservations? They'll file a report and forget us by morning." "Not this time," Dakota said, reaching for his phone. "I still have one contact from my service days, someone who might care that military dogs are being stolen and repurposed." The call was brief, the connection poor, but the response immediate. Help would come, but not until morning, which left the night to endure. Planning their next move while the silent question hung between them, was James still alive? And if so, how much were they willing to risk to save him, as if sensing the tension? Holopai pressed against Dakota's leg, a solid warmth in the chill of the hogan, the dog who had once been Ghost, who had survived battlefields and torture, who had somehow found his way back to the one human who might recognize what had been done to him. "We came back from Afghanistan," Dakota told him quietly, hand resting on the dog's head. "We'll bring James back too." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and whispers across the reservation. Something was building not just in their small circle of resistance, but in the wider community. Word had spread, lines were being drawn, and Malcolm Gray-Eyes, who had operated in shadows for years, suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar position, exposed. Dawn crawled across the desert with agonizing slowness, painting the mesas first in purple, then crimson, finally gold. Dakota hadn't slept. Neither had Nijhoni. They sat on opposite sides of the hogan's dying fire, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears for James' many horses. Only Holopai had rested, conserving strength with the pragmatic discipline of a working dog. Though his eyes opened at every sound from outside, Dakota's contact had promised federal agents by 9 a.m., still hours away, too long to wait if James was in danger, but too soon to risk compromising their evidence by acting rashly. "I can't sit here doing nothing," Nijhoni finally said, rising to pace the small circular space. "He's like a grandfather to me, to half the community." Dakota understood her frustration. Military training had taught him the value of patience in tactical situations, but also the cost of hesitation when lives hung in the balance. His instinct said, "Move." Experience counseled caution. Holopai settled the debate. The dog rose suddenly, head turning toward the hogan's entrance, ears forward, not alarm, but recognition. Moments later came the soft scuff of footsteps outside, a deliberate sound, someone wanting to be heard approaching. "Nijhoni," called a woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "Sister, are you there?" Nijhoni's face registered shock, then relief. "Kiona," she breathed, hurrying to the door flap. Her younger sister slipped inside, dressed in the uniform of the tribal police department where she worked as a dispatcher. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, her movements quick and furtive. "You need to move," she said without preamble. Danette Claw has patrols looking for you both. They're calling it a manhunt for suspects in James's disappearance. They took him and now they're blaming us. Najoni's voice rose in outrage. It's worse, Kiona continued. They're saying you stole military property. Her eyes fell on Halapai, who watched her with alert wariness. The dog, Gray Eyes, filed a formal complaint claiming he's the legal owner through some government contract. Dakota felt cold anger crystallizing in his chest. We have documentation proving otherwise. You'll never get to present it if Danette Claw finds you first. Kiona warned. There's talk of using search dogs. Your scent trails will be all over those properties you've been investigating. The implications were clear, even if federal help arrived as promised. They might be in custody before they could present their evidence. Or worse, accidents happened to suspects who resisted arrest, especially on remote reservation land where oversight was minimal and witnesses few. What about James? Najoni asked, gripping her sister's hands. Have you heard anything? Kiona's expression tightened. Nothing official, but there was a call about activity at the old ceremonial grounds near Red Rock Ranch. A patrol was dispatched but found nothing. They didn't search thoroughly. Dakota and Najoni exchanged looks. The ceremonial grounds, ancient spaces where traditional rituals had been performed for centuries, were sacred sites that even Gray Eyes might hesitate to desecrate, but their remote locations also made them perfect for holding someone unnoticed. I need to get back before they realize I'm gone, Kiona said, embracing her sister quickly. Head west toward Whitewater Canyon. There's less patrol coverage there. And Najoni, be careful. Danette Claw isn't himself lately. There's fear in his orders. After Kiona departed, Dakota checked their supplies, the camera with its damning images, Najoni's medical kit, a few provisions for the day ahead. Not enough if they needed to go to ground for longer, but sufficient for the immediate plan forming in his mind. We're not waiting for the FBI. He told Najoni. Decision made. We're going to the ceremonial grounds. She nodded, relief visible in her face. What about the evidence? We make copies. Dakota removed the camera's memory card. Duplicating the files onto a spare card, Najoni produced from her bag. You take one set west, as Kiona suggested. If the federal agents arrive, give them everything. And you, her eyes already held the answer, concern creasing her brow. Halapai and I will check the ceremonial grounds. In and out, reconnaissance only. You can't face Gray Eyes alone, she protested. His security team is armed. Dakota checked the hunting knife at his belt, the only weapon he'd carried since returning from Afghanistan. I'm not looking for a fight, just confirmation that James is there. Then we let the professionals handle it. Neither of them believed the reassurance, but Najoni didn't argue further. They had reached the critical moment where paths diverged by necessity. She took one memory card, securing it inside her boot, then embraced Dakota briefly. The old ones say we don't find our paths, she told him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Our paths find us when we're ready to walk them. Be careful. Dakota, this is just the beginning of your journey home. Before parting, she knelt beside Halapai, examining his injured leg one last time. The dog submitted to her touch with newfound trust, his eyes fixed on Dakota, as if ensuring his handler remained in sight. His body remembers what his mind might not, she observed. Military dogs are trained to protect their handlers at any cost. Don't let him sacrifice himself for you. They left the Hogans separately, Najoni heading west toward distant canyons, Dakota and Halapai circling north to approach the ceremonial grounds from higher ground. The morning was heating rapidly. the sun burning away dew almost as soon as it touched the earth. In such conditions, tracking dogs would struggle to follow scent trails a small advantage, but they would need every edge available. The ceremonial grounds lay in a natural bowl surrounded by sandstone formations that created both protection from harsh weather and remarkable acoustics for traditional ceremonies. Ancient peoples had carved symbols into the rock's spirals, handprints, animals recording their presence across centuries. Despite his urgency, Dakota found himself slowing as they approached, cultural reverence momentarily overriding tactical concerns. Hualapai showed no such hesitation. The dog moved with heightened awareness, his rehabilitation forgotten as military training reasserted itself. He led rather than followed, choosing paths that offered concealment, stopping at intervals to test the air and listen. They reached the rim of the bowl by mid-morning, finding cover among tumbled boulders that provided views of the grounds below. At first glance, the sacred space appeared empty stone circles undisturbed, the central fire pit cold, but Hualapai's rigid posture told a different story. Something or someone was there. Dakota used binoculars to scan methodically, seeking any sign of disturbance near the western edge. Partially concealed by a jutting rock formation, he spotted it disturbed earth where something heavy had been dragged, vegetation crushed by recent movement, and beside it, something that didn't belong, a cigarette butt, still showing the white of its filter against the red dirt. Hualapai whined softly, drawing Dakota's attention to movement at the far edge of the grounds. A man emerged from behind stone pillars. Not Gray Eyes or Dennett Claw, but one of the security personnel they'd observed at Red Rock Ranch. He walked a perimeter check, rifle slung casually over one shoulder, pausing occasionally to survey the surrounding rims. After completing his circuit, he disappeared back into what must be a hidden entrance, likely a traditional storage cave adapted for current purposes. "Good boy," Dakota whispered to Hualapai, confirming what the dog had already sensed. "They're here." The question now was how many guards and whether James was still alive. Dakota calculated angles and approaches, weighing risks against the need for more information. Direct confrontation was suicide, but they couldn't leave without confirming James's condition. Hualapai made the decision for him. The dog rose silently, eyes fixed on the ceremonial grounds, body language communicating clear intent. Before Dakota could stop him, Hualapai began making his way down the slope, using natural contours for cover with the skill of a predator. "Hualapai!" Dakota called in the lowest whisper that might carry. "Ghost, come back." The dog paused, looking back once with an expression that seemed to evaluate Dakota's orders against some higher purpose. Then he continued downward, leaving Dakota with the choice to follow or remain behind, cursing silently. Dakota followed, keeping low and moving carefully to avoid dislodging stones. The dog was tracking something specific, not random exploration but purposeful movement toward the hidden cave entrance. As they drew closer, Dakota heard voices, at least two men, words indistinct but tones clear enough. Bored, casual, unconcerned. At the base of the stone pillars, Hualapai froze, head turning toward an opening barely visible in the rock face. From inside came a new sound, a low moan of pain that could only be human. James. The sound triggered something in Hualapai. Not fear, but its opposite. The dog's posture shifted subtly, weight centered, muscles coiling with controlled energy. Dakota recognized the stance from Afghanistan Ghost preparing to engage a threat. "No," he whispered, reaching for the dog. "We need backup." Too late. with fluid grace that belied his injured leg. Halapai darted forward into the cave entrance. Startled voices erupted inside, followed by the distinctive sound of a weapon being readied. Tekoda had no choice. He ran forward, hunting knife drawn. The cave opening led to a larger chamber where natural light filtered through cracks in the ceiling. 2 guards stood with weapons raised. Facing Halapai, who had positioned himself between them and a third figure slumped against the far wall, James' many horses, hands bound, face bruised but eyes alert and defiant. "What the hell?" one guard exclaimed, rifle trained on the snarling dog. "Where did it come from?" "Shoot it," the second ordered, reaching for his sidearm. Greyayez said no witness. Tekoda didn't let him finish. He launched himself at the first guard, momentum carrying them both to the ground, the rifle discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space, the bullet ricocheting off stone walls. Halapai seized the moment, targeting the second guard with the precision of military training, jaws clamping around the arm, reaching for the gun. The fight was brief, brutal, and decisive. Tekoda's combat training, dormant for years, resurged with muscle memory honed by survival. One guard lay unconscious from impact with the stone floor. The second cradled a savaged arm, blood seeping through his fingers, eyes wide with shock and pain. "Don't move," Tekoda ordered, retrieving their weapons and quickly binding them with their own belts and bootlaces. Only then did he turn to James, cutting through the ropes that secured the elder's hands and ankles. "Thought you might come," James said, voice weak but steady. "Told them the spirits would bring a reckoning." "Are you hurt?" Tekoda helped him to a sitting position, noting with concern the elder's pallor and the unnatural angle of 2 fingers on his left hand. "Questions," James replied grimly. "About what we knew, about the dog." Greyayez was most interested in the dog. Halapai approached then, blood darkening the fur around his muzzle. Eyes still alert for threats, but demeanor gentled as he sniffed at James's injuries. The elder reached out with his uninjured hand, touching the dog's head with surprising tenderness. "He remembers who he is now," James observed. "The warrior has returned." Outside, the sound of vehicles approaching shattered the moment of respite. Multiple engines, moving fast. Halapai growled, moving toward the cave entrance. But Tekoda called him back. "Too many," he said, mind racing through limited options. "We need another way out." James struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Tekoda. "The old ones built these places with wisdom," he said. "There is always another path." He directed them to the rear of the cave where shadow concealed a narrow fissure in the rock, tight but passable, leading upward through the stone pillar. Tekoda helped James through first, then urged Halapai to follow, the dog squeezing through with determined focus. Tekoda came last, pausing only to collect the guards' weapons and their radios. Knowledge of enemy movements would be crucial in what came next. As they emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up the rock formation, voices echoed from below. Sheriff Dennettclaw was issuing orders, his tone sharp with anger and something else, fear. And beneath that, another voice, smoother but harder somehow, Malcolm Greyayez, no longer maintaining the fiction of legitimate businessman. "Find them," he was saying. "The dog especially. It's worth more than all of you combined." Tekoda helped James navigate the ledge toward higher ground, Halapai ranging ahead to scout their path. Below, the commotion grew as the guards were discovered. As searchers spread out across the ceremonial grounds, They needed to reach the rim before the search expanded upward. From there, if they could make the dense juniper forest beyond the ridge, they might evade pursuit long enough for help to arrive, if help was coming at all. As they climbed, James stumbled, his strength failing. "Leave me," he gasped. "I slow you down. No one gets left behind." Tekota replied, the words emerging from some deep place where military honor still lived. "We all go home together." Halapai returned to them, pressing against James's side, offering support in the only way he could. The old man gripped the dog's harness, and together they continued upward. 3 wounded souls united against those who would break them. They were halfway to the rim when the first shot rang out. Someone below had spotted them. The bullet struck stone nearby, sending fragments flying. Tekota pushed James and Halapai against the rock face, shielding them as best he could while assessing their deteriorating situation. "Go!" James urged again. "Take the evidence. Complete the mission." The words military, purposeful, struck Tekota with unexpected force. This was a mission, perhaps the most important one he'd ever undertaken. And like any mission, it demanded clear objectives and the will to achieve them at any cost. Below them, Gray-Eye's voice rose above the others. "I want that dog alive. Anyone who harms it answers to me. The others are expendable." In that moment, with bullets striking stone and an old man's life in his hands, Tekota finally understood what had brought him and Halapai together across impossible distances. Not coincidence, not fate. Something simpler and more profound recognition, the recognition of shared wounds, shared purpose, and the unbreakable bond forged in the worst circumstances humans could create. "We're getting out of here," Tekota said, voice firm with newfound resolve. "All of us, and then we're ending this today." The first bullet had missed them. The second didn't. James cried out, clutching his side where the round had grazed him, leaving a bloody furrow across ancient ribs. Not fatal, but serious enough to end any hope of outrunning their pursuers. Tekota tore a strip from his shirt, binding the wound as best he could while Halapai stood guard, body tense with alertness, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You need to go," James insisted, his voice weaker, but his eyes clear. "The evidence matters more than one old man. We're not having this conversation," Tekota replied, securing the makeshift bandage. His mind raced through options, each worse than the last. The narrow ledge offered minimal cover. Above, the rim seemed impossibly distant. Below, voices grew louder as Gray-Eyes organized his men into a coordinated search party. A radio crackled one of the units Tekota had taken from the guards. Through bursts of static came Sheriff Danette Claw's voice, tension evident even through the poor transmission. "Spotted near the north face. All units converge. Remember, Gray-Eyes wants the dog unharmed. Use non-lethal if possible on the Indian. The old man is expendable." Cold rage washed through Tekota. The casual dismissal of James's life, the commodification of Halapai, it crystallized everything wrong on the reservation. The poison that had seeped into their community through men like Gray-Eyes, who valued profit above all else. "Change of plans," Tekota said, helping James into a more protected alcove in the rock face. "I'm going to create a diversion. When they follow me, you stay hidden. Nijoni has evidence already moving toward federal authorities. Just survive until they arrive." James gripped Tekota's arm with surprising strength. "No, the dog stays with me. You'll move faster alone, and he'll protect me." Tekota started to protest, but Halapai had already made his decision. The shepherd positioned himself firmly beside James. amber eyes fixed on Dakota with an expression that brooked no argument. For an instant, Dakota was transported back to Afghanistan, to moments when Ghost had made tactical decisions that saved lives, the dog's instinct sometimes sharper than human strategy. "Okay," Dakota conceded, unsure if he was speaking to James or Holopai. "I'll draw them off. Wait for my signal. Then get to higher ground if you can." The old man nodded, one hand resting on Holopai's back. "The spirits guide our paths when we have courage to follow." Dakota took only what he needed: one radio, the hunting knife, and a small stone from the ledge, smooth and red as the earth itself. He placed the stone in his pocket, a talisman of the land they were fighting to protect. "Holopai," he said, momentarily reverting to the military commands of their shared past. "Guard and protect." The dog's posture shifted subtly, an almost imperceptible straightening that acknowledged the order. Then, in a gesture that caught Dakota unprepared, Holopai stepped forward and pressed his muzzle briefly against Dakota's hand, not seeking reassurance, but offering it, moving with deliberate noise. Dakota worked his way along the ledge away from James's hiding place, then began a visible descent down a scree slope on the eastern face of the rock formation. As expected, shouts erupted below as he was spotted. "Their eastern slope? Just one of them." "Where's the dog?" Dakota ran, no longer bothering with concealment, making himself the most obvious target possible. Bullets struck rock around him. But the shooting was sporadic, difficult angles, and the ceremonial ground's protected status making even Gray Eyes' men hesitant to fire indiscriminately. The plan worked too well. Within minutes, Dakota found himself cornered against a sheer cliff face, half a dozen armed men forming a semicircle around him. Sheriff Dennettclaw pushed through them, his uniform dust-covered but his badge gleaming in the harsh sunlight. "Dakota Begay," he called. "You're under arrest for trespassing, assault, theft of property. Cut the official act." "Dennettclaw," Dakota interrupted. "We both know this isn't about law enforcement." The sheriff's face tightened. "You've stepped into something bigger than you understand. Begay, cooperate now. Tell us where the dog is, and maybe you walk away from this." "Like James was going to walk away," Dakota countered. "I saw what your friends did to him." Uncertainty flickered across Dennettclaw's features, a momentary crack in the facade of authority. Before he could respond, the circle parted to admit Malcolm Gray Eyes, immaculate despite the rugged terrain, his designer sunglasses reflecting Dakota's battered image back at him. "Mr. Begay," Gray Eyes said, as if greeting a business associate, "this has become unnecessarily complicated. All I want is my property returned." "The dog was never your property," Dakota replied. "You stole him from the military, like you've stolen from this community for years." Gray Eyes smiled thinly. "Strong accusations from a man in your position. I have contracts, paperwork. You have—" "What?" "The word of a traumatized veteran and an old storyteller. Who do you think the authorities will believe?" The radio in Dakota's pocket crackled suddenly. Not Dennettclaw's frequency, but another. A clear voice cut through the static. "This is Special Agent Wilson, FBI. We are approaching the ceremonial grounds with tribal authorization. All personnel are ordered to disarm and stand down immediately." The circle of men exchanged uneasy glances. Dennettclaw's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, then stopped. Gray Eyes alone seemed unperturbed, his smile never wavering. "An interesting bluff, Mr. Begay," But federal jurisdiction on reservation land is complicated. By the time any real authorities arrive, the situation will be resolved. It's not a bluff, Dakota said, though uncertainty gnawed at him. His call had been answered, promises made, but faith in official response had been ground out of him years ago. Evidence of your operation is already in federal hands. Dog trafficking across state lines, abuse of government property, mail fraud. Take your pick of charges. For the first time, Gray Eye's confidence showed a hairline fracture. He turned to Dennett Claw, voice lowered but still audible. Find the other one. The woman, she must have the evidence. The sheriff hesitated, caught between competing loyalties. Malcolm, if the feds are really coming, do it, Gray Eyes snapped. Mask slipping further. Everything we've built depends on containing this now. The confrontation might have ended there a standoff until authorities arrived, but fate, or perhaps justice, had other plans. From the ridge above came a sound that froze every man in place, the deep, powerful bark of a German shepherd, followed by an answering chorus of howls from the direction of Red Rock Ranch. Gray Eyes was the first to understand. The dogs. He breathed, face paling beneath his tan. They've released the dogs. Dakota felt cold realization wash through him. Hualapai hadn't stayed with James as ordered. Somehow the shepherd had made his way to the ranch kennels and freed the other dogs, military-trained animals whose conditioning had failed to completely break their spirits. Dennett Claw's radio erupted with panicked voices. Dogs everywhere. Can't contain them. Heading toward the ceremonial grounds. The sheriff's composure cracked completely. We need to pull out now, he told Gray Eyes. Those animals are trained attack dogs. If they've gone feral. They haven't gone feral, Dakota interrupted, understanding dawning like the sun breaking through clouds. They've gone home, back to what they were before you tried to break them. As if summoned by his words, Hualapai appeared on the ridge above, silhouetted against the sky, not alone, but flanked by two other German shepherds moving with military precision despite visible injuries. The sight struck Dakota with the force of revelation. These weren't just random dogs. They were a unit, responding to a leader who had somehow reclaimed his identity and called them back to theirs. Gray Eyes' men began backing away, fear overcoming training as more dogs appeared along the ridgeline. Dennett Claw reached for his vehicle keys, survival instinct overwhelming whatever loyalty bound him to Gray Eyes. You can't leave, Gray Eyes hissed, grabbing the sheriff's arm. Control your men. Shoot the animals if necessary. It's over, Malcolm, Dennett Claw replied, pulling free. There are limits to what I'll do for you. This crosses the line. As the sheriff retreated toward his patrol car, the fragile alliance among Gray Eyes' forces dissolved entirely. Men scattered, some dropping weapons in their haste to escape the advancing canine line. Only Gray Eyes remained, rage distorting his carefully maintained image of control. This changes nothing, he said to Dakota, voice shaking. Animals, property, replaceable. Not these animals, Dakota replied as Hualapai began descending toward them, moving with the fluid grace of a predator despite his damaged leg. And not on this land. Gray Eyes drew a concealed handgun, leveling it not at Dakota but at the approaching shepherd. If I can't have my investment back, no one will. Time slowed. Dakota saw the businessman's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Hualapai continuing forward without hesitation, willing to face the bullet to protect his handler. In that frozen moment, All the pain and loss of Afghanistan crystallized into a single, unbearable clarity. He couldn't lose Ghost again. Dakota lunged, not away from danger but toward it, putting himself between Gray Eyes and the dog. The gun discharged with a crack that echoed across the sacred space. Pain bloomed like fire in Dakota's shoulder, the impact spinning him to the ground. Through a haze of shock, he heard snarling, shouting, more gunshots, then silence, broken only by the soft pad of paws approaching. Howlapai's face appeared above him, amber eyes reflecting concern as the dog gently nosed his wound, then settled protectively beside him. "Good boy," Dakota whispered, darkness encroaching at the edges of his vision. Mission accomplished. The last things he registered before consciousness faded were distant sirens, the warm weight of Howlapai pressed against his side, and James' Many Horses' voice, strong despite his injuries, beginning the ancient healing songs of their people. The tragedy wasn't that Dakota had been shot protecting a dog. The tragedy was that it had taken so much suffering of humans and animals alike to expose the rot at the heart of their community. As darkness claimed him, Dakota's last coherent thought was a prayer, not for himself, but for Howlapai, that whatever happened next, the dog would never again be forced to bear the burden of human cruelty. Dakota floated through layers of consciousness, voices drifting in and out like radio signals. Sometimes he heard Nijoni speaking medical terms to unseen others, sometimes James' Many Horses chanting healing prayers in ancient Navajo. Most consistently, he felt a warm presence against his side, Howlapai, maintaining his vigil despite nurses' attempts to remove him. When Dakota finally opened his eyes fully, he found himself in the reservation's small medical center, sunlight streaming through blinds that marked late afternoon. His shoulder was heavily bandaged, pain dulled by medication that left his thoughts fuzzy at the edges. Howlapai lay on the floor beside the bed, head resting on paws, but eyes alert, tracking every small movement in the room. "He wouldn't leave," said Nijoni, appearing in the doorway with a paper cup of water. "They tried to take him out 3 times. On the 4th attempt, Dr. Williams said either the dog stays or he'd have to find another doctor for you." She smiled, though exhaustion lined her face. "I think Williams was actually relieved. Said he'd never seen vital signs improve just from an animal's presence." Dakota sipped the water gratefully, memory returning in fragments. "James, recovering at home, his injuries were less severe than yours." Nijoni hesitated. "Dakota, there's something you should know while you were unconscious." The door opened again, admitting a tall woman in a crisp FBI windbreaker, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She nodded to Nijoni, who stepped aside with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Begay," the agent said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I'm Special Agent Karen Wilson. I understand you're the one I have to thank for exposing this operation." "Howlapai did most of the work," Dakota replied, voice rough from disuse. The dog's ears perked at his name, but he remained still, watching the newcomer warily. Agent Wilson's professional demeanor softened slightly as she glanced at the shepherd. "Yes, I've been briefed on his, unique contribution, which brings me to why I'm here." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents. "We've confirmed the dog's identity through his microchip and military tattoo. Technical Sergeant Ghost, military working dog, assigned to your unit in Afghanistan 5 years ago." Dakota's heart quickened. "So, he is Ghost." "Without question. The problem is, what happens now?" Nijoni moved closer, protectively, "What do you mean Gray Eyes is in custody? The dogs have been recovered." "Mr. Gray Eyes is indeed facing multiple federal charges." Wilson confirmed, dog-fighting enterprises that cross state lines, abuse of government property, mail fraud in the documentation of adoptions. We've already identified 3 other military dogs in his operation that were reported killed in action. "Then what's the problem?" Takota asked. Tension building despite the painkillers, Wilson's expression remained carefully neutral. Technical Sergeant Ghost is still, legally speaking, military property. His adoption paperwork was falsified, but his status was never properly changed. The Department of Defense has expressed interest in reclaiming him for their working dog program. The words landed like physical blows. Takota struggled to sit upright, ignoring the pain flaring in his shoulder. "That's not happening." "Mr. Begay, I understand your attachment." "No, you don't." Takota cut her off, voice steady despite his racing heart. "That dog survived a war zone. He survived Gray Eyes' torture. He found his way back to me across impossible distances. You're not taking him anywhere." Halapai rose, moving to stand beside the bed, body positioned between Takota and the agent, not aggressive, but unmistakably protective. The shepherd's eyes never left Wilson's face, assessing threat with the calm focus of his military training. The agent studied them both, something shifting in her professional mask. "There's something you should see," she said finally, turning the tablet toward him. On the screen was footage from what appeared to be a security camera at Red Rock Ranch. The timestamp showed it was from the day of the confrontation at the ceremonial grounds. The image showed kennels row after row of dogs in various states of neglect. Then a blur of movement as Halapai appeared, moving with purpose despite his damaged leg. The shepherd approached each kennel systematically, manipulating latches with the precision of a trained operative, freeing dog after dog. "He didn't just escape himself," Wilson said quietly. "He orchestrated a mass liberation. Military working dogs are trained for complex tasks. But this—" she shook her head. "This shows cognition and planning beyond typical training. The specialists I've consulted are fascinated." "He's not a research subject," Takota said, steel in his voice. "No," Wilson agreed, surprising him. "He's a hero." She set the tablet aside, leaning forward. "Mr. Begay, what I'm about to tell you is not official FBI position. It's my personal assessment after 20 years in human and animal trafficking cases." She lowered her voice, glancing toward the door to ensure their privacy. "There's going to be substantial media coverage of this case. A military dog, presumed KIA, survives and exposes a criminal enterprise. The public loves these stories. If Technical Sergeant Ghost were to suddenly disappear back into a government program after such publicity—" She let the implication hang. Takota understood immediately. Public relations nightmare. "Precisely, which is why I've taken the liberty of contacting some people at the Pentagon who owe me favors. There may be a possibility of expediting proper adoption paperwork, retroactively." Of course, hope flickered. Tentative, but real. "How soon?" "The wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly," Wilson replied, rising. "But sometimes, while waiting for official processes, situations on the ground evolve." She reached into her jacket, producing an official-looking document. "This temporary custody order, for instance, places the dog in your care until his final status is determined. Could take months to resolve, years, even." She set the paper on the bedside table, then reached cautiously toward Halapai. The shepherd tensed momentarily, then allowed her to briefly touch his head. "Remarkable animal," she said softly. Then, to Dakota, "Did you know that in the official after-action report from your unit's ambush, there was testimony that a shepherd matching Ghost's description dragged a wounded soldier nearly half a mile to safety? The soldier was unconscious, couldn't identify his rescuer, but the drag marks in the sand told the story." Dakota stared at her, then at Halapai. As buried memories resurfaced, pain, darkness, the sensation of being pulled across rough ground. "I didn't remember," he whispered. "They told me my team found me." "They found you," Wilson confirmed, "but only after he brought you to where they could." She moved toward the door. "I'd say you've both earned the right to go home together." After she departed, Najoni moved to Dakota's side, tears standing in her eyes. "There's one more thing you should know," she said. "Remember that old photo from your military box, the one of you and Ghost during training?" Dakota nodded. "James had it with him at the ceremonial grounds. When the federal agents found you both, Halapai was lying across your body, protecting you." Her voice broke slightly. "They said when they reached for you," he picked up the photo in his mouth and placed it on your chest, like he was trying to tell them who he was, who you both were. Dakota reached for Halapai, pain forgotten, as the dog pressed his head into the offered hand. Not a coincidence, not mere chance that had brought them together again. Something deeper, a recognition that transcended human understanding. A bond that neither war nor cruelty had managed to break. "We found each other," Dakota said simply. "That's what matters now." 6 months passed like water flowing over stone, gradually smoothing rough edges but leaving the essential nature unchanged. Spring had surrendered to summer, and summer now yielded to the golden light of autumn across the reservation lands. Dakota stood on the newly built porch of his home, not the solitary cabin where he had lived in isolation, but a larger structure on 20 acres of land near Whitewater Canyon. The sign at the entrance read, "Four Directions Sanctuary," in both English and Navajo, the paint still fresh. Behind him, construction continued on additional buildings, kennels designed for rehabilitation, a small veterinary clinic, housing for volunteers. The sanctuary existed because of many things: federal grant money from the case against Malcolm Greyeyes, donations that poured in after the story made national news, and most importantly, the community that had finally rallied around a shared purpose. Halapai sat beside Dakota, his coat now healthy and thick, the military bearing still evident in his posture but softened somehow. His injured leg would always carry the memory of deliberate cruelty, but months of proper treatment had strengthened it beyond what any veterinarian had thought possible. Like Dakota's own scars, it remained as testimony to what had been survived. "They're arriving today," Dakota said to the dog, who flicked an ear in acknowledgement. "The first 3 from the Nevada facility." The investigation into Greyeyes' operation had expanded far beyond the reservation, revealing a network spanning 5 states. More military dogs had been recovered, some beyond rehabilitation, others clinging to the training and purpose that had defined them before abuse twisted their lives. The sanctuary would be their second chance, just as it had been for Dakota and Halapai. A vehicle appeared on the dirt road leading to the property, Najoni's truck, dust billowing behind it as she navigated the final approach. Her clinic in town remained open, but she spent most days here now, overseeing the medical aspects of the sanctuary's work. The changes in her went beyond professional commitment. There was a lightness to her movements, a certainty that hadn't been there before. As she parked and walked toward the porch, Halapai trotted down to meet her, The bond between them having grown steadily since those desperate days at the ceremonial grounds, she knelt to greet him, then continued to where Dakota waited. "The transport is about an hour out," she reported, joining him on the porch. "James is bringing a group of elders to perform the blessing ceremony before they arrive." Dakota nodded, grateful for the elders' continued involvement. James. Many horses had recovered fully from his injuries, his resilience remarkable for a man his age. More importantly, he had become the sanctuary's spiritual advisor, insisting that healing for the animals must include traditional ceremonies alongside modern veterinary care. "How are you feeling about it?" Nijoni asked, studying Dakota's face. "The expansion, everything moving so fast." It was a fair question. For years after Afghanistan, Dakota had barely been able to manage his own existence, let alone a project of this scale. The nightmares still came occasionally, and probably always would, but their power had diminished, replaced by something more urgent purpose. "I'm ready," he said simply. "We both are." She smiled, understanding the "we" without explanation. Since the confrontation with Gray Eyes, Dakota and Hualapai had operated as a unit, two halves of a whole that had somehow found each other across impossible distances. The official adoption papers had finally come through 3 months ago, though the bond they formalized had existed long before bureaucracy acknowledged it. "There's news from the federal prosecutor," Nijoni said, her expression turning serious. "Grays is offering a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for information on his entire network." Dakota absorbed this with complicated emotions. The businessman's arrest had sent shockwaves through the reservation. Some mourned the economic opportunities that disappeared with him. Others celebrated the removal of an influence that had corrupted their community values. Sheriff Dennett Claw had resigned in disgrace, though he too was cooperating with authorities, seeking leniency. "Will they take it?" Dakota asked. "Probably. His information could shut down operations in 3 other states." She hesitated. "There's something else. Gray Eyes has been asking to speak with you." Dakota stiffened, surprised by the request and his own visceral reaction to it. "Why?" "He wouldn't say, just that he has information specifically for you." Nijoni touched his arm gently. "You don't have to see him. No one would blame you for refusing." Before Dakota could respond, another vehicle approached the tribal council van, carrying James and several other elders. The moment for decision passed, replaced by the immediate needs of hospitality and preparation for the blessing ceremony. James emerged from the van with the dignified care of his years, but his eyes were bright with purpose as he surveyed the sanctuary. The other elders followed, carrying bundles of sage, cedar, and other materials for the ceremony. "The 4-legged ones are coming home today," James announced, clasping Dakota's arm in greeting. "It is good. The circle closes." The elders moved toward the newly constructed rehabilitation kennels, beginning their preparations. James remained behind, his gaze resting thoughtfully on Hualapai, who had positioned himself between the activity and Dakota, alert but calm. "Nijoni tells me the Shadow Man seeks to speak with you," the elder said, using the name many on the reservation had given Gray Eyes since his fall from power. Dakota nodded, unsurprised that James already knew. Little happened in their community without the elder network being aware. "I haven't decided yet. When enemies seek audience, they bring either traps or truths," James observed. "Sometimes both. What would you do?" The elder smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "I am not the one he wounded. That question belongs to you and your brother." He nodded toward Holopai. But remember, knowing an enemy's heart can be a form of power. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle larger than the others, moving slowly on the unpaved road. The transport had arrived ahead of schedule, bringing the next chapter of their work. Dakota felt Holopai press against his leg, the dog's body tense, not with fear, but with anticipation. Whatever mysteries gray eyes might still hold could wait. Today was about beginnings, not the closing of old wounds. The transport stopped near the newly constructed kennels. The driver, a young woman from the Navajo Nation Veterans Affairs Office, stepped out and opened the rear doors. Inside were 3 crates, each containing a dog with its own story of service and suffering. As Dakota and Holopai walked toward them, the sanctuary's true purpose crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't just about rehabilitation or justice. It was about recognition, seeing the value in lives that others had discarded, acknowledging the dignity that remained unbroken despite cruelty's best efforts. The first dog emerged from its crate, a Belgian Malinois with scars similar to Holopai's, eyes wary but alert. It took one uncertain step onto reservation soil, then another, nostrils flaring as it processed new surroundings. When its gaze fell on Holopai, something shifted in its posture. Not relaxation exactly, but recognition. One warrior acknowledging another. Dakota knelt slowly, allowing the newcomer to approach on its own terms. Beside him, Holopai remained steady, a living example of the transformation possible here. "Welcome home," Dakota said quietly to the Malinois. The greeting meant for all the broken warriors yet to come. The hard part is over. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps it wasn't. But standing on Navajo land with Holopai beside him and new purpose before him, Dakota believed it was at least possible that for these animals, like for himself, the path from brokenness to wholeness could be walked one step at a time. Together, behind them, the elders began to sing, ancient songs rising into the clear autumn air, the ceremony of welcome, the ceremony of healing, the ceremony of coming home. Sometimes life's deepest wounds become our greatest purpose. When Dakota Begay, a broken Navajo veteran, raised his hand for that injured German shepherd nobody wanted, he wasn't just saving a dog, he was finding his way home. Like many of us who've weathered life's hardest seasons, both man and dog carried invisible scars, their spirits fractured by experiences others couldn't understand. Their journey reminds us that it's never too late to begin again, that purpose often finds us when we've stopped looking for it. The most powerful healing happens when we recognize ourselves in another's suffering and reach out despite our own pain. In a world that often discards what's damaged, there's profound wisdom in seeing value where others see only brokenness. This story speaks to anyone who's felt left behind, forgotten after your years of service, or unsure if your best days are behind you. Remember Holopai's journey from the battlefields of Afghanistan through unspeakable cruelty to finding his way back to the one person who would recognize him. Like him, your resilience, your ability to keep going when everything seems broken, isn't just survival. It's your greatest gift to a world desperately in need of second chances. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.